I saw something just moments ago on our mutual friend Brandon's Instagram with you describing a situation where you were playing for Chris Coleman and he gave you some pointers. So naturally, the question I have is, what did Chris Coleman tell you?
Yeah, back when I had just started music school in 2011, and yeah, the school I went to, music school I went to, Chris Coleman also went to for bass guitar uh, years before I went there, and so he would come and do clinics from time to time, and I found out like he was coming to do a clinic, and so I immediately booked a private lesson with him, and so yeah, the I was like the first student he had of the day or whatever. So he came in and he had a bass guitar and uh yeah, he just kind of pulled out his bass, had me sit on the kit and was like, "All right, start playing." And I was just like, "Oh, so I just started playing something. He started jamming along with his bass and you could tell he was just kind of listening to what I was doing the whole time. And then, we stopped playing and he started telling me all you tend to slow down a little bit and you were doing this and. Um, and I loved it. That was like this is super cool. I've got this guy I've been like admiring for years, giving me tips on my playing or whatever. And then we had a whole like hour and a half of just talking drums and asking him questions and stuff. And it was a big. I learned a lot of really like valuable, like core value stuff in terms of like things that I still practice a lot today. A lot of that foundationally came from that lesson. Um, and yeah, he was a super nice guy. I'm sure he doesn't remember because he's done hundreds of those or thousands at this point. Um, but yeah, it was a big moment for me to kind of pick his brain.
I have an analogous moment actually with Nashit Waits, who I'm 150% sure doesn't remember. It was in the early 2000s, but similarly, there were things that changed my approach and my conception of where the level was and what I wanted to work on in ways that I could put into words and not. But I understand the vibe of getting those sort of inflection points. Besides Chris, are there any other inflection points you remember that you feel like you wouldn't be the same drummer without, whether they were humans or gigs or anything else?
I mean, I haven't gotten to meet a lot of drummers in person, um, a few here and there. But for me, the big stuff that I can think back on was like in my late teens. That was when like videos on the internet started becoming kind of a thing, at least in my house. And that was the first time I started seeing these drummers that, because I grew up, I played drums in church. My dad was a pastor when I was a kid. And so I knew music from the radio or like VH1, stuff like that. So the drummers I was influenced by when I was a young teenager or a kid was like I loved like Creed. I loved like POD or Linkin Park. Like I was listening to that kind of stuff, and to me, that's kind of what drumming was in my mind. And then you see a video of Tony Royster when he's 11, and you're like, "What the heck is this?" Or any of these. Like I saw a video of Mike Portnoy playing for the first time, and I didn't know that double bass was a thing at that time. I didn't know what that was for, and then of course you start seeing the Weckles and Caliuta and Gadd, and um, though that was a big moment when the first time I saw like Thomas Lang. I remember thinking, "Oh my word, I know nothing about drumming. I'm terrible." Suddenly I go from thinking, "Oh, I play drums," to I don't know anything about drumming because I can't comprehend anything that these drummers are doing. But that moment of like kind of a mixture of depression and feeling terrible about myself, also with like excitement about like, oh wow, there's a whole world to explore here. So I went out and I started buying drum books and drum DVDs. Like drum DVDs were a huge thing at the time. Um, and I loved there was some drum DVDs that had huge impacts on me. So like Todd Zuckerman's Methods and Mechanics DVD, and the second one, but that first DVD, that was huge for me. There was a lot of great information in that, and I just watched that DVD a ton. Um, Benny Greb's Language of Drumming DVD probably had, that was the first time I saw the grid system, and that had an enormous effect on my understanding of how to practice. I'd never seen anything like that. I was learning everything by ear or by watching stuff, and to have a system where it's like, hey, go through this and find out where your weak links are. That to me was like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. So for me, it was discovering different drummers through their DVDs that they were putting out. Um, that had a huge impact. So by the time I went to music school when I was 24, I'd learned a lot of uh, information through those DVDs that, it was a mixture of what I kind of already knew learning by ear growing up, stuff I'd learned in different DVDs and what I could figure out in books, and then mixing that together with all of the information that you learn in school. Um, yeah, I would say the drum DVDs, like, I mean, when it comes to technique, for instance, Jojo Mayer's DVD was an obsession. I would sit every day with that thing and watch how his hand would do stuff, and I would mimic. And that's how I taught myself technique, was just sitting with Jojo Mayer's DVD and just obsessing over every little thing that he was doing in that. Um, so I kind of feel like I studied with these guys, even though I've never met them.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to know a lot more about your influences, but what you just said inspired a little bit of a tangent, which is you're sort of colloquially known in some circles as like the technique whisperer. And personally, I want to be the technique whisperer. That's my major aspiration. But I'm just thinking about how influences flow from person to person. So I see you doing stuff that I feel like is a little bit in parallel with some things I discovered mainly by studying Gordy Knudsen. And you're telling me that you're ending up in a we'll say more refined, but maybe in a similar direction as a result of studying things like Jojo Mayer and Todd Zuckerman. So my question is, accounting for variances in hand geometry and personal preference and volume level and genre, do you feel like with the advent of the internet and the flow of information across boundaries, do you feel like hand technique is coalescing more to a single best practice, and we're going to see more of a disappearance of these kind of like really walled off siloed schools of playing?
I mean, I think that could happen. I don't know. It's really hard. It's hard for me to, when I think about the internet and all the information. I can see why so many of my students get super overwhelmed, and they don't know what directions to go with their practice. There's too many options. Um, but I don't know. I think because we're not robots, our hands aren't the same and our brains aren't the same. I don't know if it's ever gonna technically kind of all become one thing, just because there's just too many good ways to do things. There's no really right way to do it. There's just a bunch of options. And there's always someone saying, don't do this, that doesn't work. And then immediately you can find someone proving them wrong. Um, and I love that, because like anytime someone makes a blanket statement like that based on their own experience, like, okay, let's say you practice French grip doesn't work for you. So you immediately go out and tell the world that French grip doesn't work. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You've never experienced life with other people's hands, or so telling people that is ridiculous. And then here comes Carter McLean, who's just basically in French grip shredding all over the kit in a way that I don't understand because I can't play French grip like that. But he's literally proving you wrong if you say that. So I like that there's so many different ways. To me, that's what's fun. When I was exploring technique, it was like I start with Jojo Mayer, and I learned some stuff from Todd Zuckerman DVD. I learned some from Steve Smith's teaching on hand technique. I've learned from Klaus Hessler's teaching on hand technique. Uh, I've tried a lot of things because different drummers hold the sticks different ways, and the way I found how my hands worked was by having information from like multiple sources that I could chew on for a while, experiment with, and then you discover what works. And so for me, that's always been the answer: is I want different perspectives, so that I can pick and choose the things that actually work for me. Because there's the chance of me sitting down and you know with like one teacher or something and doing everything exactly like they do and it working as well for me as it does for them is super. That's a super small chance.
Yeah.
Um, so I hope not. I hope it makes it more obvious how many options there are, and
Mm.
that they're I get it's really I don't like personally telling students that they're doing things wrong, because who am I to tell you that you're doing something wrong when there's so many different ways to do stuff. You might the thing that I think is wrong for you might be right, and you might end up doing it at a really high level someday, and then I'm going to look like a fool because I told you it was wrong.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I hope that the internet makes it clear that there are way more right ways to do things, um, than just having like one or two that are technically correct. If that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And I think directionally we agree. Maybe a really nerdy way to put it would be you want an algorithm rather than an orthodoxy. Because an algorithm, I think, and computer science people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard it defined as sort of just a series of instructions. If this happens, do that.
Yeah.
Subsequently, if this happens, do that. And you could kind of imagine a flow chart that's, I mean, it's an oversimplification, but a flow chart that takes into account hand geometry and the size of sticks someone's using and the way they want it to feel, the way they want it to sound, and sort of takes people through in a way that arrives at an optimal thing for each person. And I think there's a difference between having an algorithm and no algorithm that's different from having an orthodoxy and no orthodoxy. In other words, we are brushing up against the laws of physics, obviously, with hand technique and foot technique and whatever else. So in a vacuum, there are obviously going to be more and less optimal things, like one end of the lever versus the other end of the lever, and certain trade-offs, right? Like I'm fascinated with these trade-offs. Like Mark Giuliano holds the stick practically right at the fulcrum. So does Keith Carlock. Somebody like Justin Brown, I think when I watch you, it looks the similar way. I certainly do. Gianluca, the Italian drummer, holds the stick almost at the butt. So what's that trade-off? You're probably exchanging a little bit of the optimum bounce for a little bit more of a feeling of power. But it does feel like maybe a better way to put this is that with the advent of all this information sharing and all these sort of crossed streams, as long as a student is with a good teacher who's plugged into that, the number of wasted steps hopefully would be fewer today than say 30 years ago, maybe.
I think as long as you as an educator, if you've taken the time to explore different options to the point where you can technically actually show, like there might be a certain technique that I don't use very often, but I want to be able to demonstrate it to a student and say, look, here's a couple options on how you can explore this. Here's what works for me. This is what feels best. But you can also do it this way, and you can move the stick to this part of your finger. And you can do, and you show different options of how to do stuff so that they understand that there's multiple right answers here. You just have to figure out what works for your hands. I don't have super big hands. If all of my fingers were an inch longer, my technique would look different for sure. Um, and so it's, if I just go to someone has big hands and I'm telling them how to play drumsticks with my small hands, you know, it doesn't, it's, if I try to teach them exactly what I do, and I could say, here's exactly what I do, but you could also change this and you could try middle finger or pointer finger, or, like the Tony Williams thing where you're kind of holding down here a little bit more. Like, I think it's about just showing different options. And, I try to, at least with students, make them feel like, you know, there are certain things you're trying to accomplish and there are multiple ways to get there. In the end of the day, good technique to me is when you allow the sticks to play the instrument, at least, as much as physically possible. My hand's job is to put the stick in motion, and then once the stick is hitting the instrument, my hand's job is no longer to provide energy. It's to transfer all the energy into the stick, and now my hand's job is to keep the stick from flying away and then reload the stick and send it back. So it's like, as long as I'm letting the stick play and I'm not making the stick like an extension of my hand and my forearm, I think there are a lot of ways that you can get there. And just because, for instance, if I'm an American grip, I prefer more of a middle finger fulcrum, whereas a lot of people don't. They want that kind of first notch on their pointer finger to be holding that balance point, and that's fine. You should be able, as an educator, I think you should be able to demonstrate either, even if one isn't necessarily more comfortable for you.
I'm a little bit stick agnostic. Obviously, I play and endorse Meinl cymbals. I really love the Meinl 5Bs. Norbert sent me some foundries while I'm here in Europe to borrow, which is very kind. And with every set of foundries is a set of 5As. So I have one left over in my closet here in the apartment that I haven't yet brought to the studio. So it occurred to me that maybe we'd want to demonstrate, or I would want to demonstrate something visually. Maybe not. So I went and grabbed them. But I really like the feel of the Meinl 5Bs at the very least.
Yeah, I use the hybrid 5B right now, and I really like it. The 5A feels weirdly top heavy to me. Every time I get on the kit, I'm like, these feel heavier than the 5Bs. And I don't know what that is, but they just feel a little more top heavy. But yeah, I mean, like, stick selection is another thing that I think, just like a technique, in order to really know like how much you like a stick, I feel like you should spend 2 or 3 weeks playing that stick before you can make any kind of decision on whether it's good or bad. Because it's so easy to sit with a new stick or something, and after like an hour or something, you're like, ugh, that stick feels terrible. Well, I don't really know. Like, I haven't spent enough time with those 5As. They might not feel top heavy if I played them for a week or two. They might actually feel amazing. And I kind of discovered that when I was in music school, the importance of just picking up a pair of sticks and working with it for a few weeks before I make a judgment on whether it's good or bad, And I think the same thing goes for technique or things that you're learning. You have to give it more time, and most of the time, I think people don't want to give stuff that much time.
It's interesting that we both gravitate toward 5Bs for everyday playing, and I've definitely found them to be the most optimal when I'm doing any sort of backbeat stuff. If I'm playing jazz, sometimes I'll use 5As, but I feel like for anything backbeat, I like 5Bs. And I was astonished to learn that a lot of my favorite drummers who play with tremendously more power than I do, use much thinner sticks. I'm talking about everybody from Gianluca Pellerito to Mike Mitchell to Chris Dave. A lot of these guys just use toothpicks. And if anything illustrates that there's a variety of correct answers, it's that. It's just playing the drums must feel so kinesthetically different to them than it does to me. where to take this. I think more than anyone, so there are certain players who I follow who I think are great avatars of things that a lot of great players do, but distilled. So just for instance, I really like watching Stan Bicknell just for the shapes he makes on the kit and for the combinations. Like he's almost the avatar of if someone just shedded combos like really, really hard, like what that would look like. So I'll always go to him for if there's a cool sounding combo I didn't think of. And I think of you in the same way, just in terms of body choreography and body movement. Almost like a boxer or a martial artist, like the efficiency of movement. And I have a couple questions in this vein, but I suppose my first one, so for people who are just listening, obviously check Justin out on his Instagram, but he plays with a combination of power and relaxation and is able to harness a great amount of stick height when he needs it without it looking like a big effort, but also like great dynamics. So I suppose my major question would be, from all those influences you listed, is there one that you consider pivotal to that style, or was that innate to you? Did you always sort of play like that, or did you have to work on it?
A big influence for me in terms of the way I play now, um, because my goal is to play with a lot of dynamic range, and my goal is to uh, like be able to move from place to place on my kit in the most efficient way I can. Um, and when I got to music school, one of my teachers in music school, his name's Tom Knight, and Tom played for TLC when TLC was the big deal back in the 90s. He was their touring drummer, and he's really good friends with Weckl and studied with Weckl for like, I don't know, 15 or 20 years or something. Um, and I guess Weckl used to send him VHS tapes, and he has funny stories about how Weckl would every time he'd get a video, Weckl would be like, "Man, you have no idea how lucky you are. I don't do this for anybody." Uh, but then he would show him everything that he was practicing, and my teacher Tom, he would he would basically just study Weckl's, like he would transcribe like a whole song and then spend months learning how to play everything note for note. And he clearly studied the movement and stuff. So when Tom would get up and like the teachers would get up and demonstrate the whatever jazz tune we were working on that week or whatever, and the teachers would just slay whatever standard we were working on. And then they're like, "Okay, your turn," and we're like, "Oh," because Tom played like Weckl. It was this very like effortless and smooth, like economy of motion, like you think Weckl or Caliuta, any of those guys, it's like it's so effortless and easy. It's like they could fall asleep while doing it. Like it's just so smooth. And I became obsessed with that way of moving around the drums. Tom would always like when I would play a jazz tune, I'm like I'm there because I want someone to like shred me to pieces and tell me what I need to work on. And he would always, I'd finish the tune and he'd be like, "Man, the stuff you're playing is great. The ideas are great, but you need to be able to play all of that at half of that volume." And I was just like, "Okay, that's what I'm going to be obsessed with dynamics now." And so I became obsessed with controlling everything and be able to play everything with the sticks like this high and then everywhere in between. And um, so dynamic control and economy of motion and all that just became an obsession. It just became something that I thought about a lot. When I would set up a drum kit, I started thinking like, okay, what's the most efficient way to actually set up? Not what's comfortable for me now, but what's actually the most efficient way for me to set up so that I'm doing the least amount of work. And so things started changing. The heights of things would change, the angles of stuff. When I figured out how to balance in my seat the right way so that I'm not using my feet as kickstands. They're no longer responsible for balancing my body and playing an instrument, but just playing an instrument. Like how do I sit in the seat so that my feet are just kind of floating there over the pedals ready to play? That kind of stuff. I just became obsessed with that stuff. So it was a real process to to develop that side of my playing. But in a weird way, it's also something that I guess I didn't have to think a lot about in with certain aspects of it. I think I think once I can understand a concept and like make a decision on what I want to try to do, my brain's always been really fast with learning things when it came to drums. Like since I was a little kid, unlike any other area of my life, my brain just figures out drumming stuff. It just like I can quickly learn stuff. And it just, yeah, for some reason things just make sense to my brain. So on the one hand, it's like some of it I think is just natural stuff that I figured out without thinking a lot. And then there's the other side of it where it's like there's stuff that I still to this day and probably for the rest of my life I work on constantly because if I don't, it starts to slip. Left hand, for instance, I hate my left hand. I'll always hate it. It'll always be a pain. That's just how it is. I just have to constantly give it work. It's like my right hand remembers everything, and my left hand, it seems like, will forget stuff in a week. And so there's always that side of it where you just it's constant work. But that's what I love. I love the work side. I love the practice side. If I woke up and everything was just solved, suddenly it would be very boring. I like that there's no finish line. I'm never going to learn everything I want to learn. I kind of like that. So, anyway, sorry to ramble about it, but
No, it brings up a bunch of possibilities of directions to go, but let's start with left hand because you mentioned playing jazz, and I think one thing about people who play jazz is that the ride cymbal, the need to play the ride cymbal, let alone at fast tempos, kind of is a forcing function for your lead hand, be that right or left, to get its shit together. And then the left hand is getting nowhere near the amount of reps on that. And it's just sort of the orphaned child. So recently I've kind of come to two conclusions and I want to run this by you. So number one is if you can play the ride cymbal at a fast tempo with decent volume over a long period of time, that's a pretty good bellwether that a lot of mechanics are working efficiently. Like that's a little bit hard to fake. And the second one was if I can get my left hand to do what my right hand does on the ride cymbal, that's a good direction to shoot. And even if it's not perfect, it's probably getting me closer to better left hand mechanics. Yeah, how does that land?
man, it's funny. I literally was like, I have like a practice symbol right here. Last night I was sitting there going, man, I need to get my left hand where I can play these up tempo ride patterns just like my right hand. I was literally just thinking it not even 12 hours ago. I do it with my right hand. I'm like, yep, this is butter. I can do that. And then your left hand's like, and I'm like, okay, but if I try unison strokes, my left hand suddenly gets much better at stuff. And that's why, I mean, unisons in general are my favorite thing, and I practice them constantly. Because I feel like if you just give your left hand something to emulate, just give it a teacher, suddenly it's so much easier to work on. So whenever I need to work my left hand, I try to do a lot of mirror image practice and can I get my left to look and feel like my right, which maybe not. I can never 100% do that, but you can get close. But yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. Like, I need to start making my left hand sit there and it goes even further than that. Like I can, if I need to hold my right arm like this, I can do this for probably an hour. Whereas if I did this with my left, like 10 minutes in, I'd be like, oh my word, because I'm just used to keeping my right hand. I'm like, I need to start making my left hand. And I've done some open-handed practice. In fact, there was a time when I took every cymbal off of my kit except for one on my left, so that I had to learn to ride with my left, and I had to learn to finish every fill with my left, and little things like that sometimes are fun. But no, I totally get what you're saying. Kind of reverse the role and force your left hand to play all all that stuff that you do on a ride cymbal. I think that's great. And I definitely want to do that, especially now that we've talked about it.
Yeah, I was doing a similar thing. First, I was playing unisons between the ride cymbal and the snare, and then I was like alternating between ride cymbal and snare, and it's definitely frustrating. I want to get a little deeper into how you teach in an environment where there's not necessarily a right answer, or the right answer varies person to person and personal preference to personal preference. But there's probably some kind of optimum that we as teachers want to coax a student towards. Like, I don't know if you teach complete beginners, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you would approach just taking somebody from zero to decent hands in a way that felt and sounded good for them.
If I'm teaching a if I'm teaching a beginner how to play, and I used to teach at a music store, so I only taught beginners mainly, for about 7 years. And technique, what's funny is like when I taught at a music store, it was mostly kids. And I found that working too much on technique was a good way of them not wanting to come back. And all the stuff that I thought I'd be teaching when I started teaching at a music store kind of went out the window. All the stuff that I would have wanted to know when I was a kid, I realized none of these kids want to know any of this. And there was a guitar teacher at the store that he was telling me after, he'd been doing this for a few years. And he basically said, look, you have to, he's like, I had to basically get rid of all the books that I was going to use and all that stuff. He's like, I started treating it more like I was a drug dealer. And I need to get these kids hooked so that they keep coming back. And I was like, wow, that's a weird way to. But he's like, seriously, you just have to find a way to make it fun for them. And then they have a blast, and their parents are like, man, he loves coming to drum lesson. He's like, you just have to find a way to make it fun. So I stopped teaching a lot of technique stuff to beginners for years because most of them had no desire to learn it, and they just wanted to learn how to play a song. And so it was like, okay, let's just figure out how to get you playing a song. But if someone comes to me and they're really serious and they really want to work on their technique, maybe they've been playing for a while and they just never worked on it. So normally it's about like, okay, well, let's see what you're doing now, because not everything you're doing now is wrong. There's certain things about what you're doing, even if it's stiff or something, there's going to be some good stuff to get from this. But most of the time, what I have people start doing is stuff like this. It's like okay, wherever you like holding the stick, can you consistently just do this back and forth without the stick flying out of your hand or without it sliding one way or the other? Do you have the ability to just hold consistent pressure whichever direction the stick is at? And for most people, and myself included, eventually it's going to start sliding one way or the other, or it'll fly out of my hand. Um, so that's kind of the first thing is like, if you like that pointer finger and thumb or middle finger and thumb, can you consistently keep it in one spot? Um, and I just say like, start doing that when you're watching TV or something. Just, you don't even need a pad or anything. Can you go, to the extreme? Because that'll help you build all the strength there. And then, of course, there's a lot of just rebound training. You need to learn to let the stick naturally bounce back. Um, I tend to start getting people working on valving technique with the fingers, just because if you can get your fingers developed, then when you switch over back into like American grip or something, your fingers and your wrists can kind of work together. So it's getting them comfortable with rebound. If possible, I try to get them working on kind of that hinge motion where it's like, okay, let the stick bounce up, and then you can eventually learn to snap out that second stroke. So it's a lot of that stuff, but it's making it clear that like, okay, there's different places on your pointer finger that you might like, or your middle finger, or you might prefer the balance point to be down here. You just have to experiment and figure that stuff out. But for me, like the ability to do something like this and consistently keep the stick in one place is really important. Um, and then the hardest thing to teach really that I found is like learning to hold the sticks, just tight enough where it's not going to fly out of your hand. That's the reason it's so hard to teach, because it's like it's hard to learn. It's just like it just takes so much time. And I tell people all the time who are trying to develop that ability to hold the sticks really loose, I'm like, you need to get really, really comfortable with dropping sticks all the time when you practice. If you're trying to get to the point where you're holding the sticks really loose, if you're not dropping the sticks 20, 30 times while you're sitting there practicing, you're probably not developing the skill that you're looking to develop. You need to be used to the stick flying out of your hand, pick it up, keep going, flies out of your hand, pick it up, keep going. It's frustrating, but the only way to know where that line is, where the stick's about to fly out of, I need to know what it feels like to cross that line over and over again so I can hold it just tight enough. Um, and I think about like Keith Carlock holding it just the tip, and he's just got so much control. And I'm like, he probably dropped sticks thousands of times in his life mastering that technique. I know I've dropped sticks over and over, and it's like, I think that's just part of the process. And if you're never dropping sticks when you practice, my guess is you've got a pretty tight grip on those sticks when you play. And yeah, so that would be kind of where I start with people with technique, and then eventually uh, I get into the importance of multitasking with your technique. So, because most people they'll get to the point where they're doing something really well, and they'll show you, they're like, "Look, I can do it." I'm like, "Yeah, it looks really good," and then when they start playing, that just vanishes. And so and they're always like, "Well, I can't. Why can't I do this?" When I'm thinking about it, but it doesn't work when I play. And it's like, well, you have to start multitasking, just like anything. It needs to be one element of what you're doing. So that for me is, normally where I would start like counting different rates or subdivisions over the top of an exercise, just so I'm giving my brain two things to do and forcing my brain to absorb the information so that I'm not having to concentrate on it. So there, a lot of multitasking, take that exercise you're doing with your hands and try to put it into a groove or something. Make your brain multitask with the thing. That's a big part of technique. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, hopefully I answered your question.
No, I'm getting excited because I feel like there's a lot of parallel thinking, which to a degree like validates some of the stuff I've been playing with. So yeah, to paraphrase and to sort of conjoin some of the things you're saying with the ways I think about them. So I think the idea that you're holding the stick only tight enough to keep it flying out of your hand. When I think about the way I used to play, especially under extreme dynamic circumstances versus the way I'm trying to play now, I think that the thing I wasn't fully availing myself of was finger range of motion. And you don't have that finger range of motion if you're death gripping the stick. So I'll do very similar things with students where, I think I usually get pretty like a little bit more advanced people, but I'll have them make like a pinch with their hand and then lay the stick across like that, and then just touch the middle finger to it and just feel that balance, and then practice retracting the middle finger and just play with this feeling. And eventually it turns into this sort of like Murray Spivak tomahawk where it's what a finger stroke looks like at full extension, and then it's giving you that extra range of motion on top of your wrists or whatever. And I'm talking a lot about this stuff because it's what I'm working on, because it's what I'm bad at. The other thing, the multitask thing. So that's super deep because it's something I've been thinking about too. And the word I use is like bandwidth. So like bandwidth limitation. So if you think about like, walking and chewing gum, or like adding multiple balls while you're juggling, to where if you don't practice multiple things at once, then you're not going to learn how to do that, right? And the final thing was sort of this, you were hinting at, was this idea of like acquiring a feeling that corresponds with it being correct, and then being able to find your way back to that, and then also being able to transpose that into real life playing situations. So like taking that theoretically correct technique on the ride cymbal or on the practice pad, and then being able to find it like when you're trying to flow instead of reverting to old habits. So all that's very, very interesting to me. One slight pivot is I've been thinking a lot about playing loudly, mainly because practically every time I do a shad or get across in a real room with a drummer I admire, I realize the major limitation compared to them is volume. And I think volume gets a bad rap. I think people assume it's always unmusical. But number one, I think you want to be able to create a big dynamic range. And number two, this is a thing I want to run by you. I suspect it's a proxy for other things happening correctly. So much that perhaps, well, let me turn this to you. Do you largely agree, or to some degree agree, with the statement, if you can't play something loudly, efficiently, then your technique isn't fully developed?
To be honest, I've always thought the opposite. So, uh, like I think that like from what I see in the world of drumming, I think most of the guys, if I was if I don't if I was a betting man, I would say that most of the guys who play really loud are going to struggle more with playing quiet than the quiet guys are going to struggle with playing loud. So like I I don't know, I've seen a lot of like jazz guys who are mostly playing quiet and they can play loud. A lot of them can play loud and they still have their technique and stuff. But I've seen also a lot of guys who everything they play is loud. They have incredible chops and speed. And if it was like, hey, play something really quiet and control it, and suddenly it's like they have no touch. They don't know how to let the sticks do the work. They don't know how to play quietly. So I've always thought of it differently. It's why I have such a huge respect for jazz drummers because the style just like to play it well requires really good technique. Whereas like I think there are a lot of really great rock drummers and gospel drummers, whatever, play loud all the time, and their technique is like not very good because the music they're playing just doesn't require it to be very good. Um, so I don't know. I've never really thought about that, but I'm sure you know I don't play super loud. I know there are situations that I'll get into where I'm playing with people and we're playing really loud, and I'll realize like a song in or something that wow, I can't play this loud for very long. Like my hands start to hurt and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm not used to playing this volume for that long. So for me, it's a stamina thing, but I've never thought about it that way. I've never thought of like good technique when you're playing really loud. Um,
I'm practically obsessed.
you are?
Yeah, just because I keep having the same situation where I'll feel great maybe about some licks in the practice room, but then I'll sit across from a drummer I admire and their volume is like 4x what I can produce. So it feels like by combining our various perspectives, good technique is required to play quietly and then also to play loudly. But I suppose it depends on what you're trying to do too, right? Like if you're going to play jazz and or quiet venues, then as long as you're playing musically and you can play soft, then maybe it's not required to get the finger weights or whatever else, right? Yeah.
I'm more obsessed with quiet playing than loud playing. I love practicing quiet stuff. I love playing quietly. Um, it doesn't stuff when I try to play more quietly or with a lot of like touch, that stuff doesn't tend to do well on Instagram. So I don't share a lot of videos playing that stuff because people just don't care. I don't think if it's not, in your face or whatever. But I love it. Like if I would just sit on a bop kit with some big jazz rides and just play like super quiet, intricate stuff, and I'd be happy for years. Um, so I tend to you know want to play more. I mean, I'm obsessed with like Mark Juliana's playing. I love his dynamic control, and I know he talks about how much he practices quietly, and I'm like, man, I can relate to that. Um, so I don't personally think about playing really loud all the time, but I play very loud and have played very loud in certain situations, like all the time. I play CCM gigs every week, so you're playing very cookie cutter music where everything's very simple, but volume and power is a big part of it. So I'm used to playing really loud stuff. But when it gets intricate and loud is when I'm like, okay, this is a world that I don't spend enough time in, because I realize really quick that I don't have the stamina to play really intricate stuff at that volume.
Well, along those lines, since we're coming to the end of our hour, what interests you most creatively these days? Like if you had your druthers, where would you put your creative energy? What type of music would you create?
It's been the same for years now. I love improvisational music. I like when I can sit down with a band. We all have a framework of a song. We all know the basic framework, but we can explore however we want around that. Like to me, if I can sit down with people and just improvise over a basic framework, I'm in heaven. Um, and I can just kind of play off of what I'm hearing them do. I like if my life was different and I was performing more music and I could just play whatever music I felt like playing, I'd probably be trying to go out there and play a lot of jazz or, improvisational fusion type stuff. I really love improv. And that my all of my playing is based on it. Like when I just all of my Instagram videos are from my improvisational practice time where it's like, okay, I'm done hammering away on all of the technical stuff. Now I just want to flip the switch and let my brain dump whatever I'm here, like just whatever I'm hearing, and let my subconscious just dump a bunch of stuff. So I'm obsessed with improv. It's like my favorite thing. And so if I can sit down with a group of musicians and we can kind of just play off of each other, like that's my favorite. I just don't get to do it a lot because I'm not out there I'm not out there going to all the jam nights and doing all the stuff like that. It's just not where I'm at in life. Um, but my guys in my band Naughty Panda, we're all starting to getting the itch to like actually put out. We've never put out any real music, so we're like, we need to put out like a little EP or something. So we're all getting really excited about that. So hopefully there'll be something soon, but I don't get to play the kind of music I love to play very often.
Since you've alluded to improvisation, this is another interesting pocket to explore, and maybe if we ever do a part two, we can go deeper. But if you were to make the case to somebody that improvisation is worth learning and fun and should be a part of their drum practice and their drum oeuvre, we could say maybe someone who's like, I don't like solos, I only like groove. Like what's the strongest case you would make for the need for improvising?
I guess if like you just really don't like it, my guess is people don't like improvisation or soloing because it's so uncomfortable, because they don't feel like they do it well. And so for me, the reason would be like, that's why you should do it. If it's an uncomfortable thing, why is it uncomfortable? It's probably uncomfortable because in the moment when you want to improvise, your brain starts kind of freezing up, and you don't know how to flow from one idea to the other. Well, if you want to just be able to sit with musicians and play, and if you want to be able to, even if you're playing a song that you already know, well, what if you're playing it and the bass player starts doing some extra little thing and you're like, "Oh, that's cool." Well, if you haven't worked on being able to like change what you're doing in the moment, then how are you going to play along with what the bass player is doing this time when he does that or whatever? So I guess I would kind of approach it from that angle. But if it's really just that you don't like it, then hey, who am I to tell you what to like? But if it's because it's uncomfortable and you don't feel good at it. Well, let's figure out why that is, because there's probably uh, something about the way that you're practicing that is preventing you from the ability of connecting your ideas seamlessly. And it could be a simple matter of like just adding one or two steps to your practice process that could help you take a bunch of things that you're capable of playing and turn them into things that you can easily start stringing together and pull out whenever you want. Um, and then my guess is once you can actually do it, you're probably not going to say you don't like it anymore, because it's super fun to sit there and just kind of improvisationally flow between different ideas. I can't imagine someone with the ability to do it and not enjoy it. So that's what I would tell.
That's really well put. What have you got going on that you want to shout out? Where should people go to check out your latest stuff?
I haven't put out anything recently. I've got the lesson videos that I sell on my website. I'm very proud of the content on those, but um, some of them are, a number of years old and they need to be updated. I'm currently, like, I have a developing flow lesson I've been selling for years. I'm currently working on a new flow lesson, like a whole new practice chain, which I'm really excited about, but that's that's still months away. I'm working on a new on a my first book will be a rudiment book,
Hmm.
like rudiment application and kind of my process for it. So I'm developing a book. I'm hoping the book will be out sometime in the summer, but I don't know about the whole like publishing side of things and like self-publishing, or I haven't figured all that out. I'm just trying to get the book written at this point. And then I shot some lesson material with Meinl back in December. I'm not sure when that's coming out, but I'm sure in a few months that will start popping up. Um, but yeah, I mean, right now, in terms of educational material, I haven't put out anything recently, but obviously, if anybody wants to study with me, I do a lot of private teaching, Zoom lessons and things like that. And then, yeah, if you're interested, I have lesson material on my website that covers, various topics. But yeah, I think the coolest stuff is coming soon.
Fantastic. Well, Justin Scott, this has been a pleasure. Really, really appreciate your time.
Definitely great talking to you, great meeting you. Uh, yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.